Welcome to West Film, where every movie has a story worth telling. From heart-pounding action to twisty mysteries and dramas that stick with you, we dig into the plot, the characters, and the moments that make each film worth your time. So grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's jump into today's movie. This is West Film. Your story starts here. Once they reach a higher floor, Anna and Jane find their path blocked by a pile of debris on the stairs. Anna sets Jane down and tries to climb over it, but her footing gives way and she nearly falls. She catches herself just in time, but the sight of lifeless bodies floating beneath her drives home just how dire things have become. She decides against pushing forward and turns back instead. On another floor, desperate residents are breaking into apartments simply to reach a working bathroom. Suddenly Anna hears someone calling her name. It's one of the company's security agents, out searching for her. She starts to move toward him, then realizes Jane has slipped away into one of the apartments with the crowd. She dashes in after him, shouting his name, and freezes when she spots a massive wave barreling toward the window. The sight triggers a buried memory, being trapped underwater in a car with her husband, Guan, the night he died. A heartbeat later, the wave smashes through the glass, flooding the room and scattering everyone inside. Anna's bag is swept away, and though she lunges after it, it slips out through the broken window and is gone. Nearly out of there, she surfaces just long enough to grab a breath before plunging back down to look for Jane. She finds him unconscious in another room, grabs hold of him, and fights her way toward the exit, but the door won't open. Running out of oxygen and strength, Anna passes out. Moments later, the security agent, Hyo, breaks through, revives her, and helps get Jane out too. The three of them swim upward, haul themselves over a balcony railing, and make it back to the hallway. Hyo immediately starts CPR on Jane and manages to bring him back. Jane wakes up sobbing and clings to his mother. Hyo films proof that they're alive and sends it to the company to confirm their lead researcher has survived. As they push on upstairs, Jane says the rising water reminds him of the day his father drowned in the car. That's when Hyo drops the real bombshell: a helicopter is coming, but it might not matter. 3 hours earlier, an asteroid struck Antarctica, triggering a massive ice melt that's now surging north as floodwater. The government knew the impact was coming but hid it from the public because there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. This flood is only the start. Humanity may be facing its final hours. Anna is floored by the revelation and can barely process it. Sensing her disbelief, Hyo explains that her company was never simply an AI research lab. Her real assignment was to help build the emotional foundation for an entirely new form of humanity. Only 2 scientists had been tasked with finishing that emotional core: Anna, and her superior, who drowned in the flood along with her own child. Anna argues that the emotion engine is unfinished and still in testing, but Hyo waves the objection away. Every other team has already delivered. Synthetic human bodies capable of independent thought and reproduction already exist. The only piece still missing is emotion. Their conversation is cut off when Jane announces, urgently, that he needs a bathroom. With no time to argue, the 3 of them duck into the nearest apartment. While Jane's inside, Anna borrows Hyo's phone to call her mother, her voice breaking as she tells her she loves her. Before they can leave, strange sounds start echoing through the walls, and without warning, a gas line in the kitchen explodes. Gas fills the apartment and forces them out into the corridor, where fires are now breaking out in neighboring units, flames racing along both walls of the hallway. Hyo climbs onto a balcony railing to reach the next level and calls for Anna to pass Jane up to him. But Jane panics and won't let go of his mother. The struggle throws Anna off balance, and she falls into the flooded water below. The car accident memory flashes through her mind again, but she forces herself to swim to the surface and grabs onto a sign to steady herself. Determined, she swims back toward the building and hears a child, Jisoo, crying from inside a submerged elevator. Anna tries to pry the doors open with her bare hands, but they won't budge. She heads upstairs to find something to break them open, but overhears frightening talk coming from one of the apartments A, people plotting to attack others A, and retreats in fear. By the time she makes it back to the elevator, the water has risen even higher and Jisoo has gone quiet. Then another huge wave slams into the building and drags Anna under again. As she sinks, the memory returns in full, smashing the car window, Gwan telling her to swim ahead with Jane while he stayed behind, growing weaker, and finally, in his last act, pushing their son toward her and telling her to keep going without him. The memory snaps and Anna breaks the surface near the stairwell, scrambling up to find Jane and Hyo. Jane looks pale and sick. He needs medicine that Anna lost earlier. Without a second thought, she scoops him up and heads back toward the apartments to find something that might help. Hyo tries to stop her, coldly reminding her that Jane's stored data means he can simply be recreated if he dies. Anna refuses to accept that logic. She breaks into a random unit, pulls together ingredients from the kitchen, and makes a traditional home remedy, which she gently gives to Jane. Another memory surfaces, Anna talking with her boss, Hanemo, admitting that she once considered giving Jane up. When Hanemo asks if that's because of Gwan's death, Anna explains that Jane exists only because of her research, and confesses she doesn't feel fit to be a mother. Hanemo tells her no one ever truly feels ready, then reveals that the emotion engine is finally complete and that the company will soon be taking the children they created. Hanemo quietly wonders aloud whether they should have ever brought them into the world at all. Back in the present, the homemade remedy works and Jane's condition improves. He shyly admits that he sometimes likes being sick, because it makes his mother pay more attention to him. Looking outside, they're startled to see sunlight as the storm seems to have passed. Hyo tells Anna she'll be taken to a shelter, but Jane won't be coming with her. He admits he never really came for the sake of the project. He came to see what Anna would choose. He also reveals that his own mother abandoned him as a child. Just then the sky darkens again, rain returns in force, and the building starts flooding at a terrifying rate. The three of them race up the stairs, barely staying ahead of the rising water. Along the way, Anna spots a pregnant couple begging for help, but Hyo urges her to keep moving and ignore them. Jane innocently asks Anna if she was ever this scared while she was pregnant with him. The question breaks something in her, and she collapses in tears. When Hyo checks on her, she snaps back, screaming that she will not abandon her child. Hyo explains that with Hanemo gone and her child dead, Jane is now the last remaining hope for humanity's future. They reach the rooftop, where a helicopter waits. Hyo reads out the company's final orders: human extinction must be prevented at any cost, and Anna is to return to the lab immediately to finish the emotion engine. Security agents take Jane away, now referring to him only by a designation A. Newman 77A, as Anna is restrained and forced to watch, screaming, while her son is led off in handcuffs. Broken and desperate, Anna begs Hyo for help. After a long silence, he finally tells her the truth. Hanemo never actually died. She escaped with her child, choosing certain death over a life where she'd be forced to abandon her daughter. Meanwhile, the security team sedates Jane and begins shaving his head. Anna panics, screaming and pleading with them to stop, begging only to be allowed to stay with her son until they reach the shelter. The guards tell her flatly there is no shelter, and then, right in front of her, they execute Hyo. Anna finally understands the full horror of it. Everyone here is meant to die. She alone has been chosen to leave. After a tearful goodbye, the guards cut open Jane's head to extract his stored data and seal it inside a small case. The helicopter lifts off carrying only the pilot, the data container, and Anna. As the storm swallows the world below, Anna reaches into her pocket and finds Jane's goggles still there. Elsewhere across the globe, 7 rockets launch carrying the last of the project's scientists. A recorded message from the director explains that within 15 minutes, a wave of meteor fragments will strike Earth and wipe out nearly all remaining life, and the mission has to continue beyond the planet. The team already knows how to print physical human bodies, and both intelligence and reproduction have been solved. The only missing ingredient is emotion. Their plan is as simple as it is brutal. A mother and child are needed to anchor the emotional foundation of a new society. The child has already been perfected, only the mother remains unfinished. Anna herself proposes the solution: place a mother in a simulation that forces her, over and over, to endure extreme hardship while trying to save her child. By living through loss, fear, sacrifice, and love again and again, the system can harvest the full range of human emotion far faster than it otherwise could. As meteor fragments close in on the rocket fleet, Anna is plugged into the simulation. She wakes up in her own bed, except this time, water is already seeping into the apartment. Her phone rings. It's Hayo again, saying rescue is on its way. As memories of her talk with Hanamo come flooding back, Anna realizes exactly how this plays out. The guards will come for Jane. She grabs the medicine, tells Jane firmly to listen closely and never go with strangers, and lifts him into her arms as they rush for the stairs, only to find both directions jammed with fleeing residents. Another wave crashes through the building. Anna holds Jane tight and swims upward, helping him over a railing into the hallway and pulling herself up after but when she turns around, he's gone. Panic takes over. She runs through the corridor until a fresh wave forces her to stop, and from between the buildings she spots Jane struggling in the water. She dives in after him, but the current is too strong. As a helicopter appears overhead, another memory flashes, a different simulation entirely, and she feels something in her pocket. Jane's goggles. A floating car slams into her from behind, and everything goes black. Anna jolts awake to Hayo performing chest compressions on her. Her uniform reads 787 at the number of failed simulation attempts. Hayo shows her a photo taken earlier. Jane never actually went into the water. The child she saw drowning wasn't him at all. Anna leaps up demanding answers, and when Hayo tries to hold her back, she grabs his gun and fires into the floor to force him to explain. Shay urges Jisoo to leave with her, warning that the apartment will soon be underwater, but Jisoo refuses, as the elderly couple with her are her grandparents, and she won't leave them behind. Shortly after, Hayo gets a call. A search team with a boat is on its way to sweep the building for Jane. The memory of Jane's data extraction flashes through Anna's mind, and she knows she can't afford to wait for anyone else to find him first. This is now simulation 7993. As Anna makes her way floor by floor, she watches security agents gun down looters without hesitation. On another level, she notices children's drawings scrawled across a wall, which reminds her of how Jane used to send her drawings on his tablet, one shaped like a heart in particular. Fighting back tears, she keeps moving. She comes across the pregnant woman from before, now in labor, and helps deliver the baby, wrapping it in her own jacket for warmth. As she leaves, she sees the father returning with warm water to clean the newborn, a moment that fills Anna with guilt over all the times she brushed Jane aside. She remembers the drawings he constantly sent her that she rarely even acknowledged, and checking her phone now, she finds thousands of images, drawings of her leaving him behind, over and over, right before boarding the helicopter. Then Hayo shouts from another floor, he's found Jane. Anna sprints toward the sound, but the moment she enters the apartment, agents tackle and restrain her. Hayo calmly tells her they'll wake her on the roof so she can say her goodbyes. Anna bitterly points out that he dies on that roof every single time. This is his simulation 13417. When Hayo presses for real answers, the agents shove him aside, and on his way out, fragments of earlier simulations finally start breaking through his memory. He grabs a heavy trophy off a shelf and turns on the guards. One recovers and raises his weapon, but Anna, barely conscious, grabs another gun and fires first, saving Hayo. Afterward, Hayo injects her with a stimulant to snap her fully awake and demands to know everything. She tells him the truth. She has failed to save Jane in every single run. They've had this exact conversation before, even fought the guards together before, and always ended up dead. Anna admits she's afraid Jane might not even want to see her anymore. Hayo insists the opposite is true, that the boy is waiting for her. Simulation 21499. Anna and Hayo are once again pinned down in a firefight with the agents, but this time Hayo suggests a new plan. They escape through a window and race across another floor. In the corridor, Hayo fights an agent hand-to-hand and deliberately stays behind to draw the others off so Anna can keep searching. She bursts into an empty apartment only to be ambushed again, but before the agents can restrain her, another massive wave crashes through the window and scatters everyone. Freed in the chaos, Anna swims through the flooded structure, still unable to find Jane. Once the water has risen high enough, she heads up and finds him unconscious inside an abandoned wardrobe on the roof. She immediately gives him the medicine, but nothing happens, and she collapses sobbing, apologizing for leaving him behind so many times. Then Jane's eyes open. Calmly, he tells her she never actually abandoned him, that when she said goodbye, she told him to hide in the wardrobe and wait, and that she always came back for him. In that same moment, the truth is revealed. Meteor fragments struck the rocket carrying Anna, mortally wounding her. Before she died, she begged the director to upload her mind into the simulation so she could stay with Jane. The scientists preserved her memories, hoping her emotional journey would help humanity survive. Back on the rooftop, agents close in as an enormous wave approaches. Anna hands Jane his goggles and tells him to swim. He leaps into the water just as a guard spots her. Another memory surfaces. Jane and Hanamo's daughter were never born naturally. They were printed by the company to develop child-level AI, which is exactly why the agents saw them as disposable. Only their date to ever mattered to the company. Jane met Guan after the experiment had already begun, but Guan chose to be his father anyway and genuinely loved him. His death left a mark on both Anna and Jane. As the simulation starts to reset once more, Anna breaks free of the agents and dives into the flood. She falls through streams of data and water and resurfaces beside Jane, who's clinging to an antenna. She wraps her arms around him, promising they'll swim together, just before another wave engulfs them both. This time, though, Anna also helps Jisoo, supports the pregnant woman, and never once leaves Jane's side. The system finally registers her selflessness and marks the simulation a success. New bodies are printed, and the AI versions of Anna and Jane are placed inside them, then sent off to a distant planet, carrying humanity's memory to build a new society. Breaking it down, what if the real enemy in this story wasn't a monster or a villain, but water itself? Not the kind that crashes down all at once, but the kind that rises slowly and silently, cutting off your options one by one until you're trapped. The Great Flood isn't really another disaster film about collapsing skyscrapers and last-minute heroics. It's a story about what happens before the world actually ends. When warnings go unheeded, systems break down, and ordinary people are forced to choose between staying alive and staying human. Floods are frightening precisely because they don't strike all at once. They creep, they surround, and by the time the danger is obvious, it's already too late. This film leans hard into that dread, building a tense, emotionally heavy experience that's less about spectacle and more about how people behave under pressure. Fear, sacrifice, selfishness, courage, all of it rises right alongside the floodwater. What follows is a full breakdown: the story, its themes, hidden details, the ending, and whether this disaster film actually earns its ambition or drowns under the weight of it. Released in 2025, The Great Flood lands at a moment when disaster films have moved past pure destruction and started grappling with consequences. At its core, it's a blend of disaster, thriller, and drama, but instead of overwhelming the audience with chaos right away, it lets the tension build slowly, letting unease settle in before the scale of the catastrophe becomes fully clear. The setting is a densely populated region where life looks stable, almost mundane, but something is already off underneath that normalcy. Warnings exist, signs are there, and, much like real crises, they're downplayed, delayed, or simply ignored. When the flood actually hits, there's no dramatic countdown or explosion, it just creeps in. Streets vanish. Safe zones shrink. The systems people depend on, transportation, communication, authority, collapse one after another. What sets the film apart is its unwillingness to promise anything. These are ordinary people up against an extraordinary disaster, with no guarantee of rescue, heroism, or a happy ending. This isn't a story about saving the world, it's about surviving it. And as things escalate, one message becomes clear: nature doesn't negotiate, and not everyone rises to the occasion when the pressure hits. On its surface, the film checks every disaster genre box: rising danger, failing infrastructure, the constant sense that time is running out. But unlike most disaster movies, which lean on spectacle and heroics, this one slows everything down. The tension comes from waiting, from uncertainty, from watching escape routes vanish one at a time rather than from explosions. At its heart, it's a survival story, and survival here isn't only physical. The characters are constantly forced into situations with real moral weight. Do you help someone else when resources are scarce? Do you trust a stranger when fear takes over? Or do you look out only for yourself? These choices turn the flood into something more than a natural disaster. They turn it into a test of character. Emotionally, the tone is heavy throughout. There's anxiety in nearly every frame, claustrophobia in every tight space, and a constant undercurrent of helplessness as the water keeps advancing. Help is present, but it's fragile, easily drowned out by panic and grief. Because of that, this isn't a movie for viewers chasing light entertainment or non-stop action. It's for people who appreciate realism and psychological tension, and who want stories that reflect how people actually behave once control is taken away from them. It's a disaster film, sure, but more than that, it's a deeply human one. The ending doesn't hinge on defeating the disaster, because that was never really on the table. As the flood peaks, the surviving characters come to a painful realization: there's no last-second rescue, no miracle fix, no heroic act that undoes what's already happened. Nature has made its decision, and all that's left is enduring it. In the final stretch, the water finally starts to recede, not as a victory, but simply because time has passed. What's left behind is shattered infrastructure, broken systems, and lives that will never be the same. Survival comes at a cost, and the film makes sure that cost is felt. Some people live, some don't, and nothing goes back to how it was. The disaster doesn't end in triumph, it ends in aftermath. Symbolically, the flood stands in for more than a natural disaster. It represents denial, delayed action, and the illusion that anyone was ever really in control. When the water finally pulls back, it exposes the real failure, not the infrastructure, but the judgment behind it. The survivors are left not as heroes but as witnesses, carrying memory, guilt, and responsibility forward. The film deliberately avoids offering comfort, because real disasters don't come with closure, only lessons. Even the quiet after the storm isn't meant as relief, it's meant as reflection. The film leaves the audience with an open question: did anyone actually learn something? Or will the same cycle repeat the next time a warning gets ignored? It never answers that, and that's the point. Visual details and symbolism underneath the surface-level disaster. The film hides plenty of visual storytelling that's easy to miss on a first watch. The most obvious symbol is water itself, but it's never used as just a physical threat. Early on, water appears in contained, controlled spaces, pipes, drains, distant shorelines. As the story progresses, it starts invading homes, streets, and eventually deeply personal spaces, mirroring how fear moves from something abstract and public into something intimate and unavoidable. Confined spaces recur constantly: elevators, stairwells, rooftops, narrow hallways. These aren't incidental locations, they reinforce a feeling of being trapped, both physically and mentally. Even in moments when characters are technically safe, the framing makes escape feel just out of reach. Broken and abandoned objects appear throughout the background too: stalled cars, floating furniture, discarded shoes, phones gone silent. These small details are quiet reminders of lives interrupted mid-moment, reinforcing the idea that disaster doesn't wait for anyone to find closure. Sound design does some quiet foreshadowing as well. Early on there are background noises: distant sirens, dripping water, muffled announcements that gradually disappear entirely. By the final act, silence dominates, and that silence doesn't read as peace, it reads as exhaustion and loss. The world hasn't recovered, it's simply stopped screaming. There are also small narrative Easter eggs tied to ignored warnings: early dialogue about report, alerts, or concerns that get brushed off. They seem minor at the time, but in hindsight they become tragic markers pointing to everything that could have been prevented. None of it is accidental. The film is making the case that disasters aren't sudden, they're built over time, through neglect and denial. The closer you look, the clearer it becomes that the flood was never the only danger. Behind the scenes, the production behind the Great Flood was every bit as demanding as the story it tells. One standout detail: the filmmakers leaned heavily on practical water effects rather than relying on digital flooding for every scene, shooting large sections in controlled, water-filled sets. That wasn't purely a realism choice, it let the actors physically feel exhaustion, resistance, and panic, and that translated directly into more convincing performances. Several cast members reportedly went through water safety and survival training to prepare, learning how to move against strong currents, stay calm while submerged, and act through scenes while partially restrained by water pressure, all in service of instinctive, rather than performed, reactions. Filming in water is notoriously tricky from a technical standpoint. Lighting behaves unpredictably, sound becomes hard to control, and continuity is a constant headache. The crew had to coordinate scenes with real precision, often keeping takes to a minimum to balance safety with emotional authenticity. There's also some structural trivia worth noting: certain intense sequences were deliberately scheduled later in the shoot, after weeks of filming, so the cast would appear naturally fatigued rather than relying on makeup effects. Some trimmed or deleted scenes reportedly expanded on side characters' backstories, cut for the sake of pacing and keeping the focus on survival rather than exposition. All of it points to a production genuinely committed to grounding the film in realism. The result feels less like a movie about struggle and more like one built through it. How it stacks up against other disaster films set next to typical disaster movies: The Great Flood takes a clearly different route. Most entries in the genre chase scale: massive destruction, global stakes, heroic leads racing the clock, and lean on spectacle to hold attention. This film turns the focus inward instead. The danger feels closer and more personal, and far less cinematic in the traditional sense. Compared to high-energy disaster blockbusters, it's slower and more restrained, favoring tension over action and atmosphere over visual excess. Rather than showing off how impressive the destruction looks, it asks how people behave when there's no guarantee of rescue. In terms of survival storytelling, it sits closer to grounded survival dramas, stories driven by isolation, scarce resources, and moral dilemmas while setting itself apart by keeping the threat constant and inescapable throughout. Where it really succeeds is realism. The human behavior on screen feels plausible. Fear causes mistakes, leadership falters under pressure, cooperation is fragile. There are no exaggerated heroics, and the victories that do happen are small and often bittersweet. That approach won't land for every viewer, though anyone hoping for non-stop action or large-scale spectacle may find the pacing sluggish, especially compared to genre peers offering bigger set pieces and clearer villains. This film deliberately skips those comforts. What it does better than most of its peers is emotional honesty. What it trades away is conventional excitement, and whether that trade works for you depends entirely on what you're looking for in a disaster story. Reception. Since its release, The Great Flood has drawn a genuinely split response, which says a lot about the kind of film it is. General audiences reacted strongly on an emotional level, praising its realism, tension, and unsettling atmosphere. Rather than calling it fun, many described it as stressful, heavy, or uncomfortable, but in a way that felt intentional. For those viewers, the film worked precisely because it felt real rather than entertaining in the usual sense. Others weren't as receptive. Some expected a faster pace, bigger set pieces, or a clearer heroic arc, and found the film slow or emotionally exhausting by comparison. Critics were split along similar lines. Supporters praised the grounded approach and the focus on human behavior, moral dilemmas, and environmental realism, and applauded the restraint of letting tension build naturally instead of relying on constant chaos. More critical reviews pointed to those same traits as weaknesses, arguing the slow pacing, sparse exposition, and lack of a conventional payoff left the film feeling bleak or overly serious. The result is a film that's neither universally loved nor broadly dismissed, a divisive one that connects deeply with the right audience while leaving others cold. Historically, films that challenge expectations like this tend to age better than ones that simply follow the formula, which raises the real question: is The Great Flood flawed, or simply misunderstood? Where it lands, the film's greatest strength is its authenticity. It never chases spectacle or easy wins, instead delivering a tense, immersive experience that treats disaster as something slow and suffocating rather than thrilling. The atmosphere stays heavy, the performances stay grounded, and the emotional weight never really lets up. It also deserves credit for restraint by centering moral choices, psychological pressure, and realistic consequences. It separates itself from formula-driven disaster movies. Every survival feels earned, and every loss feels permanent. Spoilers from here: The Great Flood isn't really the disaster movie it's marketed as. Despite the title and the trailers, this is fundamentally a story about artificial intelligence, dressed in a structure that echoes films like Edge of Tomorrow, Triangle, and even Groundhog Day. It opens strong. A mother, Anna, and her 6-year-old son, Jane, wake up in a city already overwhelmed by flooding after an asteroid impact in Antarctica triggers rapid ice melt and rising seas. Before long, their own apartment starts taking on water. As they flee upward, chaos breaks out and Jane gets separated from his mother. A security officer, Hio, arrives to help, and we learn Anna is a scientist who developed something called an emotion generator, a system meant to give artificial intelligence genuine human feeling. Just as the film seems fully committed to its disaster premise, everything resets. Then it resets again. Eventually it's revealed that Earth has already been destroyed, and the surviving humans are aboard a spacecraft, running repeated simulations to perfect emotionally capable AI. One sharp visual clue: her shirt Anna wears displays a different number in every loop, marking a new simulation each time. The flood itself is really nothing more than a test scenario, designed to measure a mother's determination to save her child and, more broadly, the limits of artificial intelligence. At its core, the film is a story about human choice. It's easy to see why this frustrated so many viewers. It starts as one kind of film, becomes something else entirely, then pivots again, with each new reveal complicating what came before it. On top of that, the pacing drags through emotional beats that often feel unnecessary, and right when the story seems to move forward, it loops right back to the beginning. Still, for all its problems, the ambition here is undeniable. It reaches for themes well beyond your standard apocalypse blockbuster. To really engage with it, you almost have to stop chasing the surface plot and treat it more as a conceptual piece, hunting for the symbolism underneath. Structurally, the film splits cleanly into two halves. The opening section works well purely as disaster cinema and is easily the strongest stretch. A massive flood tearing through a modern city, outside any biblical framing, feels fresh, and the pacing here is sharp. The water rises almost immediately, climbing multiple floors in what feels like minutes, and the urgency lands. Unfortunately, the characters undercut this section. Several are grating, and the child character in particular is written as frustratingly oblivious. A scene where he complains about needing a bathroom mid-crisis breaks the tension in a way that feels more silly than human. The English dub doesn't help either. The voice work often sounds unnatural, overly loud, and grating, which drains the weight out of otherwise emotional scenes. The screenplay also loses clarity around the AI child storyline. Key plot points feel rushed or underexplained, and character motivations don't always add up. The film jumps between intense action and oddly comedic beats without smooth transitions, leaving the narrative feeling scattered. And even the flood sequences, meant to build suspense, often come across as chaotic rather than tense. Visually, there's real craft on display. Some well-composed shots and flashes of genuine tension, but they're too sparse to carry the film on their own. Ambition alone can't make up for a confusing story and distracting sound choices. One viewer's reversal. What begins as a mother and son survival story against a catastrophic, asteroid-triggered flood eventually flips into a mind-bending sci-fi narrative about perception and reality. And there's a clever idea buried in there. The direction it ultimately takes works, and the cast deserves credit for their performances at its best. The film is genuinely thought-provoking and imaginative. Taken as a whole, The Great Flood presents itself as an end-of-the-world sci-fi disaster story. Anna, an AI researcher, wakes up to a flooding apartment and escapes with her son as panic spreads through the building. Balconies overflow with people, and massive waves threaten the tower. With help from a company's security agent, she pushes toward possible rescue. Along the way it's revealed that asteroid fragments struck Antarctica, accelerating the ice melt. Information the public was never told. From the story shifts into artificial intelligence and synthetic life territory, which is hard to discuss further without spoiling it. The effects are solid. Large-scale flooding, frantic crowds, tense confrontations. Though the plot runs a bit overcomplicated, and trimming 10 to 15 minutes could have tightened it considerably. A more critical take: going in with high expectations after the teaser, the final film didn't live up to the promise. The premise is exciting on paper, but the execution felt murky and overcomplicated enough to get in the way of actually enjoying it. The idea itself is genuinely interesting and full of promise, but the execution never quite catches up. The lead is easy to root for, yet her arc feels incomplete, as if the script never fully commits to exploring her. The opening act is the strongest stretch. Tense, energetic, packed with suspense. But once the second and third acts kick in, the momentum collapses and the story drifts somewhere disconnected from what it initially promised. Rather than deepening the narrative, the shift undercuts it. The back half plays almost like a different movie, and not for the better. What could have stayed a tight disaster survival story instead gets cluttered with ideas that never get properly explained, and the ending lands as vague and unsatisfying rather than thought-provoking. More unfinished than intentional. The blend of sci-fi and large-scale disaster never quite balances. The time loop mechanic in particular feels forced and overreaching. At its heart, this is supposed to be a story about a powerful mother-son bond, but that relationship never feels strong enough to carry the emotional weight the film wants it to. The details of their connection are scattered and underdeveloped, which flattens the payoff. Even so, it's not without merit that the performances are mostly solid, even if the child character grows tiresome through repetitive writing. The effects impress at times, with striking lighting that adds real atmosphere, even when its symbolism isn't fully clear, and the near-constant action keeps things moving, though the repeated waves and destruction eventually lose their punch. The core themes are humanity leaning on AI for survival. The disaster movie formula itself aren't new, and combining them works for a while, building real intrigue. But once the time loop structure takes over, that connection fades and the story starts to feel hollow. Supporting characters barely register. Despite strong effects and generally capable acting, the writing ultimately buckles under its own twists, leading to one of the more unsatisfying endings in recent memory, a finale that feels less clever than lazy, leaning on a figure-it-out-yourself approach that leaves too much unresolved. The chronological version told in order, the story follows Anna, a scientist who helps build an artificial intelligence by raising a child from infancy and forming a genuine mother-son bond. After tragedy hits and the world faces extinction from catastrophic flooding, she realizes her employer values the AI's data far more than the child's humanity. Her final choices are shaped by love, sacrifice, and denial. Though the film doesn't always earn the emotional weight it's reaching for, she ultimately volunteers as an AI test subject herself, following the same path as Jane in an effort to help engineers build artificial intelligence capable of genuine emotion. At the second major phase of the story, every simulation shown is aimed at one goal: building a mother's capacity for true unconditional love and self-sacrifice. After tens of thousands of attempts, Simulation 21499 finally succeeds, and AI versions of Anna and Jane are sent back to Earth to help rebuild humanity. A mixed verdict on paper, The Great Flood reaches for something far more ambitious than a standard disaster movie, a philosophical sci-fi meditation on love, sacrifice, and what it means to be human. That ambition is admirable, and for some viewers, it lands beautifully. Going in with zero expectations and assuming the flood might be symbolic from the start, even a dreamlike or abstract story still needs compelling, sympathetic characters to hold attention. Unfortunately, the mother never quite clicks as a protagonist here, and the child is more grating than endearing. There's even a baffling beat where Anna finds a hidden stairwell no one else in the building seems to know about, only to abandon it over some debris, a moment where clearing the path would seem like the obvious move. What could have been an intriguing premise ends up hampered by uneven performances and a messy plot. The story loses focus, regains it briefly, then drifts again. Ambiguity can work in a film, but it needs careful balance here. Confusion often substitutes for clarity. Some defenders chalk the backlash up to audiences missing the artistic vision, but that reads more like an excuse than an explanation. Weak writing, inconsistent direction, or miscasting could just as easily be the real culprits. Anyone hoping for a grounded survival or disaster experience should look elsewhere, as this ends up feeling less like an apocalyptic spectacle and more like a man-made conceptual puzzle, one that leans into strange transhumanist ideas that may alienate viewers looking for emotional realism. Visually, there are moments worth appreciating, striking imagery and large-scale effects that arguably work even better without sound, but from the midpoint on, the story grows increasingly tangled and drifts far from expectations. It's likely to fade from memory quickly. A more positive read: the opening 30 minutes are genuinely strong, a tightly wound survival thriller with real tension and scale, driven by effects that sell the terror of a global tsunami. The lead actress carries both the physical danger and emotional weight convincingly, making the character's desperation feel authentic. The real trouble starts in the second half, when the film abruptly pivots from a straightforward disaster narrative into an ambitious, puzzle-heavy sci-fi structure. borrowing loosely from time loop and space-set storytelling to introduce recursive, layered timelines. Interesting in theory, but the tonal shift results in an overcomplicated plot full of gaps, and by the final act the repetition grows exhausting without a payoff to match. At its core the film wants to explore motherhood, a trial and error, repeated failure, the constant effort to do better for your child, framed through AI and global catastrophe. That idea is solid, and often genuinely relatable, especially for parents. But the strong thematic foundation gets buried under unnecessary subplots and narrative excess, leaving the experience feeling like something to push through rather than be carried along by. Even so, the central idea of the parallel between human emotion and how an AI might come to understand it resonates, even if the execution doesn't match the ambition. On the ending's emotional logic, even with its flaws, the film explores something genuinely relatable through a Korean cinema lens well suited to emotional storytelling. What starts as a familiar disaster scenario gradually exposes something more unsettling, a society already fractured before the water even rises. The opening half works effectively as a survival drama, built on tension and psychological pressure, its confined setting amplifying both danger and strain by keeping the focus tight on a mother and her child. It avoids empty spectacle, grounding the catastrophe in something personal. Midway through, the story pivots hard into science fiction, a shift bound to divide audiences. The pacing wobbles, ideas repeat, and the storytelling turns more abstract and allegorical. Not everything connects, and ambition occasionally outpaces clarity. Still, the emotional core holds, the lead performance keeps things together even when the script falters, and there's real earnestness in how the film explores motherhood, extinction, and the fear of a future without legacy. Visually it offers several haunting images, framing destruction as tragic rather than thrilling, and the final moments linger, reinforcing that the title is meant symbolically as much as literally. It's not an easy watch, and it's far from flawless, but its willingness to take real risks makes it more compelling than another hollow disaster spectacle. Genre blend skeptics. Some viewers walked away simply confused, not by the plot itself, but by how sharply it diverges from what was promised. What starts as a restrained, intimate disaster film suddenly veers into territory reminiscent of The Matrix. The pivot could have worked with stronger execution, but from the midpoint on the story turns repetitive, fragmented, and hard to follow. For viewers already familiar with AI-centric sci-fi, there isn't much here that feels genuinely new. A blending two underdeveloped storylines rarely produces something stronger than either alone. The premise of being trapped in a flooding high-rise had promise, but that novelty fades fast, and with the film largely confined to one location, fatigue sets in. The child character tests patience from his very first scene, with constant complaining becoming the film's most grating element, and it's telling that any hint of his disappearance was met with relief. The trailer, in this reading, does the movie a disservice. It sells a straightforward disaster thriller, but that premise is mostly abandoned halfway through in favor of a science fiction pivot leaning on familiar modern buzzwords. That's not automatically a flaw, as some viewers enjoy being surprised by an unexpected turn, but the shift may resonate more with a specific audience than a general one. Similar to other slow-building sci-fi dramas centered on motherhood and identity. For viewers who find that kind of pacing exhausting rather than absorbing, the same issue is likely to recur here, especially with a grating child character undercutting investment from the start. Praise for the craft on the visual side. The effects are strong and several sequences show genuine artistry. Even with much of the story confined to tight spaces, the cinematography often feels expansive and deliberately composed. The cast turns in solid performances across the board, and the film makes a strong case for Korean cinema's ability to produce large-scale, ambitious projects, not a traditional blockbuster, but engaging and accessible nonetheless. The main issue is a lack of clarity about what the film ultimately wants to be. The story unfolds out of order, partly from the middle, partly from the end, and is only fully explained later. In broad strokes, it follows a scientist developing AI grounded in human emotion, who raises an experimental child in a lab setting, treating him more as a subject than a son. After a global flood wipes out most of life on Earth, the corporation extracts the child's data and sends her into space with the other survivors, tasked with refining the AI system to help build a new form of humanity capable of colonizing other worlds. As she nears death, her consciousness and the child's are both uploaded into a simulation, where she's meant to learn empathy and responsibility across countless repeated scenarios, each marked by a number on her clothing. On paper, that's a powerful premise, one that could rival the strongest science fiction anthologies. In practice, the finished film feels like an unusual mashup: repetitive time loop mechanics, heavy simulation aesthetics, bursts of unnecessary action, and a heavy emphasis on symbolic motherhood without quite enough philosophical depth to support it. Individually, these pieces are compelling. Together, they form something fascinating and frustrating in equal measure, memorable, but not especially cohesive. The film seems to be chasing several very different audiences at once, which never fully comes together, and one of its biggest weaknesses is a lack of focus that never settles on whether it wants to be hard sci-fi, action, spectacle, drama, or full melodrama, resulting in a bloated experience that favors style over substance. A harsher assessment for some, this ranks among the most disappointing films of the year, an opening act that hints at real promise before the narrative spirals into confusion, bouncing between half-formed ideas and twists that muddy rather than enrich the story. By the midpoint, the film's intentions become genuinely unclear, with scenes stretching too long while crucial information gets glossed over, leaving the movie feeling both rushed and drawn out at once. What could have been a solid thriller collapses into an incoherent mess built on a wasted premise, finished more out of stubbornness than enjoyment. The film reaches for heavy symbolism around morality, human failure, and global collapse, but rarely lands any of it effectively. And for a sci-fi disaster film, the visual effects can look cheap and repeatedly break the illusion. It leaps into action without earning real suspense or emotional stakes, and while the opening builds real atmosphere, the back half feels hollow and undercooked. Ambitious in theory, weak in execution. Even viewers who don't usually gravitate toward disaster films may find the second half once it transforms into something else entirely hard to embrace, particularly given its excessive length, over-reliance on CGI that never fully sells the illusion, a relentlessly irritating child character, and a core concept: how artificially created humans are meant to repopulate the planet that never quite makes sense. Plenty of questions go unanswered, including why the security guard develops self-awareness at all if he only exists as a mental projection. Some defenders argue the film operates on a level audiences simply fail to grasp, but no film should be so exhausting to sit through that viewers give up before reaching whatever brilliance is supposedly waiting for them. Marketed as a disaster movie, it's understandable that audiences who feel misled push back and rooting for the characters to die. However clever the underlying ideas, is usually a sign something has gone wrong. A defense: the child is the point. Even so, dismissing the child character entirely misses something important. He's arguably the whole point of the film. From early on, even before the plot mechanics become clear, this reads as a story about the brutal, unrelenting labor of motherhood. Watching a physically fragile woman carry a heavy child up flooded stairwells again and again, confronting impossible odds each time, is a genuinely harrowing depiction of maternal sacrifice. The film argues, forcefully, that motherhood is a non-negotiable commitment demanding patience, endurance, and total self-sacrifice, a theme that comes through clearly even when subtitles move fast and some nuance gets lost. The visual language is strong enough that the film's central ideas reveal themselves early to anyone paying attention, which is exactly the test being placed on its protagonist. Can she develop and express the emotional depth that defines human motherhood? The repetition that frustrates some viewers isn't accidental. It mirrors the reality of motherhood itself: endless responsibility, recurring anxiety, constant vigilance, day after day, year after year, without end. What starts as a survival story framed around a catastrophic flood slowly grows into something larger, a deeper meditation on what survival actually means. This is confident filmmaking with bold ideas, striking cinematography, and a narrative built on layered visual and symbolic storytelling, the kind of film that stays with you. Reading it as allegory, much of the backlash seems rooted less in what the film actually is and more in what viewers expected it to be and what it deliberately refuses to remain. Marketed early on as a conventional disaster thriller, it later shifts into abstract science fiction and allegory. A tonal jump jarring enough to lose some viewers entirely. That reaction is understandable, but calling the film incoherent or meaningless misses the mark. At its core, this isn't really a disaster movie, nor is it fundamentally about climate collapse or survival mechanics. The flood is a storytelling device, not the actual subject. The film functions as an allegory about motherhood, emotional growth, and the missteps that come before genuine selflessness. As the story develops, it becomes clear the flood isn't purely natural. It's part of a constructed environment tied to advanced AI and humanity's long-term survival. That reframing changes everything. The water becomes a metaphor for emotional overload, its constant escalation less about spectacle and more about pressure. Anna isn't being tested on intelligence or strategy, she's being measured by her emotional priorities. The repetition and implied simulation suggest her journey is cyclical because success was never going to be instinctive. The film argues that true, complete selflessness in motherhood is learned through fear, guilt, hesitation, and failure, not granted automatically. Each loop pushes toward the same question: will she choose her child above everything else, even when logic or broader ideals argue otherwise? The observing system doesn't reward clever problem solving, it recognizes only one thing: total commitment to the child's survival. That's why the ending matters. Once Anna's emotional data is finally validated, the mother-child bond becomes the literal foundation of humanity's continuation. The message is direct: progress without emotional truth is hollow, and love isn't a byproduct of survival, it's the foundation of it. Some criticisms are fair: the rules aren't always clearly communicated, and the genre shift is abrupt enough to alienate viewers invested in a more conventional story. But calling the film empty or random overlooks the deliberate structure underneath. It doesn't spoon-feed its meaning, it asks the viewer to engage, observe, and feel. And for those willing to meet it halfway, it offers something genuinely rare: a cinematic take from its opening moments. The film pulls the audience straight into a world on the edge of collapse, with striking visuals that captured the scale of the flood with an almost eerie beauty. Every shot feels deliberately composed, drawing viewers into both the chaos and the intimate human lives caught inside it. The story balances the personal and the epic, weaving multiple perspectives together as fate pulls the characters into each other's orbit. The performances are strong throughout, with one arc in particular standing out for its resilience, sacrifice, and quiet hope that lingers well after the credits. This isn't merely a disaster film, it's a reflection on humanity, our fragile relationship with nature, and the price of survival, and it challenges the audience to sit with responsibility, consequence, and the need for unity once everything familiar starts to fall apart. It stands as an ambitious piece of filmmaking, visually impressive and emotionally resonant, a reminder of what storytelling can do when it pairs spectacle with something deeper. Enthusiastic praise. Some viewers found themselves fully locked in from start to finish, Unable to guess where the story might go next, a film that demands your full attention and only really makes sense once you give it that. Recent Korean cinema has delivered a number of visually poetic, distinctive projects, and this fits right into that trend: strong acting, impressive effects, and a script exploring territory that feels genuinely different, blending science fiction, AI, and emotional drama in a way that rewards the effort it demands. That said, some wished for a different ending, imagining Anna, suspended above glowing, grid-like patterns that resemble the foundation of a new city, descending into a reborn world to reunite with her son and walk forward together, free of the humans who put them through so much suffering. In a way, the artificial beings in the story seem to develop more emotional depth than the humans studying them, a contradiction that stands out sharply given that the scientists, while claiming to save humanity, show none of that humanity themselves, killing the people who helped Anna and destroying the synthetic child without a second thought. Not everyone will read it this generously. To some, it plays like a drawn-out apartment flood centered on an insufferable child with no real narrative momentum, a arbitrary disaster, grating characters, unfinished-looking CGI, an underdeveloped script. But there's another angle. The film starts as a fairly standard disaster setup, quietly planting seeds for a major tonal shift, and once that shift lands, it becomes something more playful and thought-provoking. Watching characters adapt and make hard choices as the flood unfolds is unexpectedly engaging, and underneath the chaos is a real question about how human emotion factors into surviving an extinction-level crisis. Cinema benefits from films willing to take this kind of risk, even imperfect ones. Frustration with the child character. For some, the film could have been significantly stronger if the child character were less unbearable, a constant yelling during moments of real danger, followed by randomly hiding during a tsunami, repeatedly breaking the tension. That single performance colored the entire viewing experience. For some, especially frustrating given how reliably enjoyable Korean cinema tends to be otherwise. That said, the film does tell much of its story visually, through subtle cues rather than blunt exposition, like the changing details on the protagonist's clothing across each story cycle, which the film expects the audience to notice rather than explaining outright. Viewers looking for everything spelled out may not connect with that approach, and anyone unfamiliar with how AI concepts function under the surface may also struggle, despite the story fundamentally being about emotion and empathy. But for viewers who enjoy thinking through ideas and interpreting meaning, the film has real substance to offer. It shares some thematic DNA with the Alicization arc of Sword Art Online, particularly in how it explores AI, identity, and human emotion. And fans of that kind of storytelling will likely recognize what the film is going for. The story starts strong as a flood disaster thriller with no slow build, then pivots into sci-fi territory focused on AI designed to replicate human emotion for humanity's survival, a shift that can feel disorienting at first but eventually reconnects with its emotional core. The third act, in particular, lands some genuinely powerful moments. A skeptical take on the AI angle, expecting a cheesy, low-budget disaster film going in, some viewers found the movie abandoning the disaster angle almost immediately, repeating the same scenario while pushing an odder concept, replacing humanity with emotionally capable AI, framed as a win for mankind. Once the disaster becomes background noise and the mother-child relationship grows more grating with each repetition, the genre switch starts to feel like a slow march toward an outcome that's already obvious. The blend of survival horror and science fiction can feel muddled rather than inventive, forcing the audience to piece together what's happening instead of being guided through it, like being stuck in a looping glitch waiting for a twist that never quite lands. Character development suffers too. It's only revealed nearly halfway through that the lead isn't just an employee but a scientist, a detail that arguably should have surfaced much earlier. There are also some believability gaps worth noting. The opening act is the strongest stretch, but even it stretches credulity. A wave on the scale shown here would realistically leave someone unconscious or worse, yet the protagonist walks away largely unscathed, and her child survives prolonged submersion without the kind of lasting damage that would realistically follow. The disaster's setup has similar issues. An asteroid large enough to rapidly melt Antarctic ice wouldn't arrive as a surprise. It would come with years of warning and global-scale precursors like earthquakes, volcanic activity, and extreme weather, none of which the film explores before jumping straight to catastrophe. And in a true extinction-level event, the response wouldn't be this localized. Governments and space agencies worldwide would coordinate, the way films like 2012 depict it are, rather than funneling humanity's survival through a handful of characters and one country's emotionally aware AI program. A leap that stretches credibility more than it inspires. After a strong opening, the AI with emotions will save us concept has been done many times before and doesn't bring much new to the table here, especially given how many other stories have already flagged the risks of emotional AI, a message that feels a little naive given where real AI development is actually heading. Some describe the overall result as glossy, well-produced, but ultimately light on substance, the kind of film you can half-watch while doing something else and not feel like you missed much, while acknowledging it still offers something for viewers drawn to time loops, alternate realities, or sci-fi concepts in general, even if it isn't groundbreaking. A cautious recommendation: going in completely blind and expecting a straightforward disaster movie, some viewers found themselves surprised by the sharp turn the story takes, and, as sci-fi fans, found that shift genuinely rewarding, with strong visuals and thought-provoking ideas beneath the surface. For those open to a film that strays from the standard disaster formula, there's a real chance it'll land. Even acknowledging the film's flaws, the strength of its core idea, however hard to fully swallow, makes it worth a cautious recommendation. The bigger issue for skeptics is scale. This isn't near-future speculative tech, but something that feels more plausible thousands of years out, if ever, stretching credibility past the breaking point and disconnecting the AI concepts from any grounded, current discussion. In the end, it may be a film best watched without overthinking the science too closely.